A recurring theme that the Maori Affairs Committee heard during our inquiry into the effect of tobacco on Maori was the fact that the tobacco industry is a killer of whakapapa, and I can attest to this from a personal point of view. In the late 1990s, my uncle J.J. Johnson, cousin of my grandmother, and my uncle Ho Davis, the brother of my grandfather, both passed away within weeks of each other, both from lung cancer, both in their early 70s, and I put it down and I hold the tobacco industry to account for their deaths. The act of putting a cigarette between their lips in their mid-60s was a result of a decision that they made when they were children. Mr. Speaker, we heard in the Select Committee that the tobacco industry targets the young, the brown and the stupid. Now, I can attest that my uncles were both very young when they started smoking. They were both brown, but those gentlemen were by no means stupid. We heard how nicotine is one of the most addictive substances on earth, and when a child is in the grip of the nicotine, they cannot resist it, and it's something that lives with them and in fact kills them in the end. So not only do I hold the tobacco industry accountable for the deaths of my two uncles and other relations who have died as a result of cigarettes and tobacco, I hold them accountable for the 600 deaths a year, Maori deaths a year, the 5,000 New Zealanders who die each year. That's 50,000 New Zealanders in the past decade who have died as a result of the tobacco industry. This report should send a message to the tobacco industry that their days ramming their noxious product into the lungs of our people are coming to an end. Mr. Speaker, one of the most profound submissions that I heard during this tobacco inquiry was that of a woman in her probably 50s and 60s in hospital dying of a tobacco-related illness. With her, watching her die in those agonising moments were her children and her grandchildren. And because the stress of watching their mother and their grandmother die was so great, every 20 minutes or half an hour, they actually had to leave the hospital room and go outside and have a cigarette. Do we see the irony of the fact that this family, to alleviate their stress and their pain and their tension of watching their mother and grandmother die, they had to go and partake of the very substance that put her in the hospital in the first place? But worse than that, Mr. Speaker, was that when that family went out to have their cigarette, they sat on a hospital bench clearly labelled "Oahi Kore," no smoking. But it's even worse than that, Mr. Speaker, because next to that park bench, or adjacent to that area, was a maternity annex. And we heard of how the children, the grandchildren of that woman, would be joined by pregnant mothers to have a cigarette on that smoke-free park bench in the hospital grounds. And there we have it, Mr. Speaker, the way the tobacco industry has captured people from one end of the spectrum, unborn children, right through the generations, children, grandchildren, up to the dying grandmother up in the hospital ward. Mr. Speaker, we're not talking here about the circle of life, we're talking about the circle of death, and the tobacco industry is responsible for it. Mr. Speaker, we heard how the tobacco industry framed their product to target children. How if somebody was to walk into a supermarket, a dairy, a service station, they'll walk in and behind the teller is the Powerwall display of tobacco products. And around that Powerwall of tobacco products will be lollies, will be chips, will be all the sorts of things that capture children's attention and captures their, captures their eye. Mr. Speaker, that is the way that these murdering bastards capture these kids from the time that they're 5 or 6, and they hold them in their grip right through until the time that they die, just like that woman in the hospital bed surrounded by her family. It is time that this Parliament took hold of the recommendations in this report and sent a message clearly to the tobacco industry that their days are numbered in New Zealand.
Has expired.